Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Muhi Khwaja with American Muslim Community Foundation. And on the Muslim Philanthropy Podcast today, we have Trita Parsi, who is the Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Just as we always do, we want to get to know who you are. Share with us your background in terms of your personal life, where you grew up, take us through your education, and then we'll jump into all the wonderful things about the Quincy Institute later.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And again, it's a great pleasure to be with you. I was born in Iran, 1974. My family fled the country right before the revolution. We ended up in Sweden. I grew up in Sweden, but came to the United States on numerous occasions, but permanently in 2000. And I stayed on. I did my PhD at Johns Hopkins SAIS in Washington, D.C. I founded the National Iranian American Council, NIAC, that ended
Wow.
up becoming the largest grassroots organization for Iranian Americans, took a very strong position against war and in favor of peace, and trying to find some sort of a peaceful resolution between the US and Iran, lifting of sanctions. And then later on, after I was an informal advisor to the Obama administration during the talks for the nuclear deal. And after that, I left and helped co-found the Quincy Institute, which is a think tank in Washington, D.C. that focuses on not just shifting the policy in the Middle East, but a paradigm shift for American foreign policy as a whole towards military restraint and far more focus on diplomacy and coexistence, peaceful coexistence.
Got it. In the time frame when your family moved to Sweden, what age were you at that time?
So I was about 4.5 when we moved. And then we didn't move because we thought we were going to stay. It was because things were getting very dicey in Iran, of course. And
Sure.
then revolution happens. Then Saddam Hussein invades Iran. The war occurs. My family's from the south of Iran, exactly where Saddam invaded the
Wow.
country. So we ended up staying in Sweden. And then, of course, the direction of the new regime, the Islamic Republic, took a very negative turn from our standpoint, of course. And so we ended up staying there. And then I relocated to the United States in 2000.
Okay. So a lot of your formal education was done in Sweden then.
Yeah, yeah. Formal education up until the PhD, which I did at Hopkins.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
Um, for undergrad, were you also at Hopkins or a different
No, so
institution?
undergrad I did at and Stockholm University in
Hmm.
Sweden. I did a master's degree in Stockholm School of Economics as well, and a degree in political science at Uppsala University. And then I came to Hopkins to do the PhD.
Great. And what was your thesis around?
My thesis in at the graduate at Stockholm School of Economics, I did on economic sanctions. And
Okay.
then my PhD at Johns Hopkins was on Israeli-Iranian relations, which ended up becoming published. My first book, which became a bestseller, Treacherous Alliance, The Secret Dealings of Israel, Iran, and the United States.
Very informative. Would love to get my hands on that to see what it's all about.
It came out, it was interesting because when I first came to Hopkins to do my PhD, I was going to focus on Afghanistan. I had worked at the UN Security Council for the Swedish Foreign Ministry, and Afghanistan was part of my portfolio. And it was one of these really understudied countries. So I thought that would be something I would focus on. I came to the US, I started my program at Hopkins, and 2 weeks later, 9/11 happens.
Wow.
And overnight, everyone in Washington apparently became an Afghanistan expert.
Mm,
So I thought that that market is now saturated, and I decided to shift my focus and instead looked at what I thought was going to be the next likely big military confrontation. And even though I'd worked a lot on US-Iran relations, there was always that Israeli angle that was so understudied. We talk about it very openly right now,
hmm.
but 20 years ago, you hardly could talk about it. And one of
Sure.
the people who really broke the taboo on that was John Mearsheimer and Steve Walt with their book Israel Lobby in 2007. I helped them out with some of the chapters in that book. But prior to that, it was like very little. In fact, the last book that had been written on Iran and Israel in the US, at least, was from 1988. And I
Okay.
started and when I kind of really had to choose my topic was in 2003 or so. It's almost 15, 16 years. There's not been anything on it, despite the fact that it was a critical factor.
Yeah.
And precisely for that reason, and because of the fact that I went to Iran and I did extensive interviews with decision makers there, as well
Mm.
as to Israel. And I spent a lot of time in Israel interviewing key decision makers there. I had first in-person interviews with the actual officials. It ended up getting a lot of attention, but also a lot of attacks. It made a lot of
I
people
would
very
imagine
angry.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this
Comes
was
with the
before
territory.
canceling, etc., was a common thing. But I was probably one of the earliest targets of that or attempts to cancel me.
Sure. Um, Now take us through the timeline from your PhD program at Hopkins and kind of the genesis of Quincy Institute.
So, one of the reasons that I took the initiative, and then together with Andrew Bacevich, Stephen Wertheim, Eli Clifton, and Suzanne DiMaggio, we founded Quincy. Part of it was actually the experience I had with the JCPOA. I was very, very skeptical that the JCPOA could survive. And this is before Trump got elected. Even before he was elected, when it seemed like Hillary Clinton was going to be elected, I was very convinced or very worried that the deal likely would collapse. Because at the end of the day, it was an exception to American foreign policy. The United States usually doesn't make deals with other countries through an actual compromise, which is what this really was.
Hmm.
It could stay and occupy Afghanistan for 20 years, and that would be completely compatible with its grand strategy. But actually
Yeah.
striking a genuine compromise was an exception and would operate in a strategic vacuum. So I was very worried that it would collapse. And sure enough, 2 years into Trump's administration, he did walk out of the deal. And I felt very much that I didn't have the energy again to fight another 15 years with a potential likelihood of being able to secure a win, but only to see that win wither away within 2 years.
Yeah.
And I
For
felt
for
that,
our excuse me,
yeah,
for our
so,
listeners, can you share what the JCPA is?
yeah, so the JCPOA was the Iran nuclear deal that was struck by the Obama administration, Iran, and all of the members of the Security Council, the P5, as well as Germany.
Thank
And it
you.
was a deal that essentially made sure that major restrictions were put on Iran's nuclear program that would ensure that it could not weaponize if it was inclined to do so. And in return, the Iranians got sanctions relief. There was a new opening in US-Iran relations. But that opening, of course, required time, and time was not granted it because 2 years later, Trump walked out of the deal. And I felt that I much rather put my energy, whatever little I have left of it, into actually changing the grand strategy of the United States so that, these type of genuine compromises like the JCPOA would not end up being the exception, but rather would end up being the
Mhm.
norm. That the United States would end these endless wars, would not even begin new endless wars, but actually focus its statecraft on diplomacy and military restraint. And there, paradoxically, thanks to Trump, there was an opportunity to create such an organization because Trump oftentimes was seen by many, particularly on the liberal side, as if he was some sort of a break with American foreign policy. Whereas in
Mhm.
reality, I think he was a caricature of what American foreign policy always had been. He was just such an exaggerated version of it. But that exaggeration also enabled people to see what American foreign policy oftentimes had been. And that created a bit of a crisis within the American elite. The confidence had been lost in the approach the US had pursued. I mean, we're talking about 20 years in
Yeah.
Afghanistan, endless war in Iraq, all of these different things. Clearly, we had not made the world a better place. And this created that opening for a much more profound rethink of American foreign policy. I don't think we really would have had the receptivity or even the willingness of funders to come in and fund it had it not been for that crisis, which very much was caused by Trump
Hmm.
coming into office. And so we founded it. We started the conversations in 2018 or so, and then in 2019 we launched.
Okay. So prior to launching, you were serving as an advisor, you said, during the Obama presidency. Um,
Informal. I was never working for the administration, but
Got it.
since my organization at the time, NIAC, had been one of the few in town that actually spent time thinking through what a compromise could look like and how you actually make diplomacy successful. Most
Sure.
think tanks and most career people in the government were spending their time thinking, what are the new sanctions we can come up with? What else can we sanction? And what other types of military pressures, et cetera, can we come up with? And that operation or that modus operandi, of course, has continued. We're seeing the effects of it right now. Very
Hmm.
few people had really spent time thinking through, okay, if we were to get genuine and serious about diplomacy, how would we do it? And because we had, it was natural for the administration to also seek our advice.
Yeah. So through launching, 2018 to 2019, tell me how you interacted with the other co-founders and why the name Quincy Institute.
Yeah, so the name, I'm very happy that you asked that. We named the organization Quincy Institute because of the speech that John Quincy Adams gave on
Yeah.
July 4th, 1821. He was at the time, I believe, a member of of Congress, but he, of course, later on also became Secretary of State and President.
Yeah.
In that speech, it's a very famous speech, extremely articulate. He says that America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. It was a call for the United States not to become some sort of an interventionist European power that built colonies and went and interfered in all other countries' affairs. And then he goes on and say that even if she did and were successful, she could become the dictresses of the world, but it would come at the expense of her own spirit and her own liberty. Essentially, a warning 200 years ago that if the United States goes in the direction of empire, one of the first things that will come, that it will lose, is the very same thing that many of the people at the time believed was the reason why America had been founded, which was to provide a type of a civil liberties to the people in America that they had not enjoyed in Europe, making those pilgrimages. And I think it was a very astute observation because one of the first things we saw happening after the 9/11 attacks in 2001 is that the United States Congress passed the Patriot Act. And we have seen a massive erosion of Americans' civil rights ever since this war on terror and this hyper militarization of American foreign policy. And we wanted to use Quincy's name as well as a reminder to Americans that it is actually not the American tradition to pursue the type of a foreign policy we have been pursuing for the last couple of decades. Oftentimes, people think that this is what it's always been, but it
Sure.
actually hasn't. There was a completely different tradition prior to World War II, in which the United States was not isolationist, but it was trying to stay out of everyone else's affairs and was more guided by Quincy Adams' idiom of not being in search of monsters to destroy abroad, but actually focusing more on what's happening here, trading with everyone, having relations with everyone, but not be some sort of a military power that was constantly throwing its weight around. That really is a product of World War II and what came afterwards. And this, of course, is now increasingly seen as if that is normal, but we're pointing to the fact that there is a completely different American tradition, one that is very, very different.
Yeah. About 20 years ago, I graduated with a degree in history. So I had an inkling that was the reason why, and glad that I was able to pinpoint that one. So tell me about your co-founders and why you all came together to establish this organization.
So, really, Andrew Bacevich is an absolute legend. He's still chairman emeritus of the organization. He himself had a very prominent military career. He served in Vietnam. He served in Iraq in the first Persian Gulf War. Left the military, became an extremely prominent historian and professor at Boston University, and became one of the most articulate critics of American foreign policy interventions and militarism. And he was a major critic of the Iraq War. Very sadly, he loses his own son in that war.
Mm.
And, of course, he was against that war even before that happened. Went to him because of the absolute legendary quality that he had and, the weight that he had on this issue. Eli Clifton was one of the first people who I actually started talking about this. Was a long-term investigative journalist. He has a fantastic book that will come out in August of this year. I encourage everyone to go and pre-order it. You can do so already now on Amazon. Let me just make sure I get the title of it right here. It is in some ways a follow-up to John Mersheimer and Steve Wald's book, Israel
Mhm.
Lobby from 2007. It's called Israel's Lobby, America in the Grip of a Foreign Power. It will come out this August, same publisher. And he had done, and part of the differences in this book is that he and his co-author really look into the money trail
Mhm.
of all of the money that has gone in and is essentially constituting this pro-Israel push within the American political system. And we just saw what happened to Tom Massey
Yeah.
in Kentucky. So I wanted him because I saw him as such a smart guy who also understood how power worked in Washington and had studied very closely how some of these other think tanks or advocacy groups operated who were on the opposite side of us. And we needed to understand their strengths in order to be able to produce something that could beat them. Suzanne DiMaggio was someone who perhaps was not very known, but that's because, as part of her job being an absolutely brilliant behind the scenes operator that numerous governments and administrations have used to be able to resolve conflicts in Iran, in North Korea, she really knew what the true meaning of diplomacy was. So we brought her in. And then, of course, Stephen Wertheim was this up and rising, young, brilliant historian who really had studied the transition of the United States from this Quincy-esque foreign policy to what later on became this hegemonic foreign policy. No one had really gone into that as deeply as he had. And he has a fantastic book on this called Tomorrow the World. It really traces how the campaign, the intellectual campaign during the World War II started to make sure that after the war, the United States would essentially take over the rest of the world. That's why the book is called Tomorrow the World.
Hmm.
Um, and who am I leaving out now? Eli. And I think that's it. Yeah. So we all came together and put this organization in. No, I must have left someone out. I'm having a bit of a senior moment here.
No
So
worries.
it was
You can
me,
look it up.
Eli, Andrew. Um, oh my God. Anyways, they'll forgive me, I hope. But anyway, we put all of this together because we wanted to make sure that we could put together an institution that could fight this long-term battle of having a complete paradigm shift in American foreign policy. We were not trying to fix one or two problems. We were trying to change the paradigm in which
Yeah.
American foreign policy was operating in.
So I'll ask this question, and if you want to look up the founders and get back to me, you totally can. But as a nonprofit founder myself, I'm always curious about the genesis, right? Like, tell me about what the organization momentum was in the beginning, what your budget was starting out versus today, and kind of how you've grown the organization naturally.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to do differently with Quincy compared to um, compared to NIAC was an organization that was essentially funded by grassroots donations. I think 80
Yeah.
or so percent of our donations came averaging $80 or so.
Hmm.
And in some ways, it provides significant strength. It means that you have real anchoring in the community that you represent.
Hmm.
It means that when you have a financial crisis, yes, you will take a beating, but at the same time, you have so many donors so that you're a bit protected. Whereas if you have very few donors and a majority of them were to leave, you can be in an existential crisis.
Yeah.
But one of the drawbacks it has is that you end up constantly raising money for the same year's budget.
Hmm.
And your fundraising is very much a reflection of how bad the situation is.
Mm,
Crisis becomes fundraising opportunities.
sure.
And you almost become an ambulance chaser in
Hmm.
which you're going from crisis to crisis in order to raise money.
Yeah.
And one of the consequences that has is that it becomes very difficult to do strategic work. You
Right.
end up doing too much tactical, reacting to crisis, rather than the type of strategic work that is needed in order to be able to do long term planning and long term impact. So with Quincy, I wanted to do it the opposite way. I wanted to make sure that we still had grassroots support, but we would put our fundraising resources into securing larger donations from donors and foundations, just to give us that type of a breadth and longevity and strategic margins that is
Yeah.
very difficult to get when you are funded by grassroots donations.
Hmm.
I also wanted to make sure, and this is obviously the entire team, that we recognize that a paradigm shift cannot come from one side of the aisle. You can't get a paradigm shift by just having Republican support or
Sure.
just Democratic
Yeah.
support. Just
Hmm.
as much as this current grand strategy, although it's kind of withering away, of liberal hegemony had bipartisan support, we needed to make sure that our alternative, which is called restraint, also had bipartisan support. So from the outset,
Hmm.
we needed to make sure that our funding was coming from both the left and the right.
Yeah.
And we managed to make sure that as early funders, we got both support from Open Society Institute, which is George
Amazing.
Soros's
Yeah.
folks on the left, and from Charles Koch Institute, which is very much on the right, the libertarian right, probably
Yeah.
better. And they had never, although they had collaborated in the past on criminal justice reform, they had never come in together to fund a startup. And both of them are strong funders of the Quincy Institute today, but our funding base has grown significantly.
Yeah.
But the fact that we managed to do this sent a very strong signal throughout all of Washington, because there had been a realization, this horseshoe theory, that there's a lot of folks on the left and the right that actually on foreign policy strongly agree with each other. Take a look at Ro Khanna on the one hand and Tom Massey
Hmm.
on the other. And you can see it going back 7, 8 years. It was actually Ro Khanna, Mike Lee, and Bernie Sanders that worked to end the war in Yemen. And it was, both folks on the left and the right.
Hmm.
What we had not seen, however, was that there would be an institutional level of collaboration between the left and right on foreign policy. It tended to be episodic, somewhat flimsy, and as a result, not impactful in a profound way. We wanted to put together an organization that managed to bring these two sides together in a much, much more systematic way to be able to have a more prolonged and impactful influence on American foreign policy. And again, going back, we didn't see any other way. Unless you have both sides, you're not going to be able to get a paradigm shift. And if you take a look at it today, it is astonishing that you can have folks on the left, even though perhaps AOC or at least Ilhan Omar and Ro Khanna on the left are actually very much on the same page on Gaza
Hmm.
as Marjorie Taylor Greene now is, Tucker
Right.
Carlson is,
Yeah.
and Tom Massey was.
Hmm.
And we're very pleased to see that despite the fact that obviously they have significant differences on a lot of other issues, there is far greater dialogue and even collaboration between them than there was before.
Sure.
And this is a huge threat to the Uniparty, the pro-war Uniparty.
Yeah.
And it's part of the reason, of course, you're seeing they're going to go after Roe. They already have gone after Massey. Marjorie Taylor Greene resigned because her kids were getting death threats, etc.
Wow.
So you have, this is, we want to be very clear that we're taking on some very, very powerful forces here. There is a military industrial complex that is benefiting from all of these wars, and they are extremely resourceful. And we really are in awe of these members of Congress that have, from both sides, come out so strongly swinging against this and trying to represent what clearly is the majority view of the American people, which is that they're just tired, sick and tired of these different wars.
Yeah, I think when so much resources are allocated to foreign policy or to the military, and there's so many issues right here on our own soil that could benefit from our tax dollars, I think it's
Absolutely.
a clear indication in the shift of perspective around foreign policy, spending tax dollars on Israel and so on and so forth. And I hope that, within our lifetime, we see significant shift in these areas. Um, so with the remaining,
Absolutely.
yeah,
And if I can just say something, it's
please.
really fascinating. Um, Folks on the left and right will have very different ideas of what should be done with the money that is no longer spent on war, right?
Yes.
On the left, they may want to have more social programs, etc. On the right, they
Hmm.
may want to just lower taxes and make sure that people can spend the money how they want themselves. And that's fine. But the degree to which there is such a unified message, and frankly, on the right, sometimes even more clear cut,
Hmm.
that this is the money of the American people, and it shouldn't be spent on these different things
Right.
abroad. It should be focused back on the American people itself.
Right.
Um, Take a look at, for instance, some of the tweets that Marjorie Taylor Greene had uh, before she resigned were they were very unapologetic in terms of saying, I'm just trying to represent what my constituents in Georgia are saying. And at one tweet she said something along the lines of, there's not a single constituent I have in Georgia who has ever met a Houthi.
Mm.
And essentially saying, what is all this talk about? We have to go to war with these people or that they're a threat to us. We never even heard of them, never met any of these people.
Yeah.
We're tired of all of these monsters abroad that we have to go
Yeah.
after and want to focus back. And then take a look at what Mamdani was saying in
Right.
his race when they were trying to push him to say, are you going to go to Israel or not? It's like, well, I'm here to serve New Yorkers. So I'm going to visit all the five boroughs and focus on their needs. And it's
Yeah.
an equally effective message on the left as it is on the right.
Absolutely. Whether it's universal health care or education or so many things, and you're absolutely right when you say, the spectrum between what the right and the left want may look different. Um, I think that there is so much opportunity and hope. And that's why I'm in philanthropy, because it's where the government falls short and the people can provide that shift and that change and that dynamic. Um, so your insights are totally appreciated and spot on. Um, with the remaining time, I'd love to hear more about your staff, the programs, the services, and just kind of where Quincy Institute has grown to today. And if you're comfortable sharing like budget size and all of those
Sure,
things.
sure. So we are now a staff of, what is it, 45 to 50 people with a focus on almost every region in the world. We have our Middle East team, we have a strong East Asia team, a Global South team, the only institute at a think tank in Washington that has a program for the Global South, and how the US has to have a new, essentially, social contract with the countries in the Global South because they are
Mm.
becoming increasingly important. Europe and Eurasia, of course, given the Ukraine war. And we are the only, I think our budget is now somewhere between 8 and 9 million a year.
Mhm.
It's the only think tank that I know of in Washington that has reached that level, that size, without taking money from the defense industry in the United States or
Wow.
from foreign governments. We take
Kudos to
no
you.
money from foreign government or American government, by the way.
Yeah.
We don't
Yeah.
take you any government money, and we don't take any money from the arms industry. If you look at the other think tanks in Washington, in fact,
Sure.
I encourage your
Yeah.
viewers to go
Hmm.
to the think tank funding tracker that our organization launched as part of our democratizing foreign policy program.
Hmm.
It's a database. You can go in and you can look at all of these different think tanks and who is funding them. And you may be able to find a certain pattern that if they're promoting certain weapon systems or certain wars, they're also funded either by countries that are benefiting from those wars or from arms industries that are benefiting from those wars. Uh, uh, and again, the pattern is there, causality, etc. We can discuss separately, but nevertheless,
Hmm.
the reality is that if you give $250 to a member of Congress, you have to disclose it. The member of Congress
Right.
has to disclose it.
Hmm.
But governments can give millions of dollars to think tanks, and they have no responsibility to disclose it at all. Arms industries are giving millions of dollars to think tanks,
Yeah.
and they don't have any responsibility. So we've been pushing to make sure that there's a standard that think tanks live up to a norm of transparency in which they disclose their funders. Even though there's no legal obligation, unfortunately, nevertheless, they should do so. If someone is
Absolutely.
going and testifying in Congress, that they have to disclose who's funding them because it's very important. We can't say that there's this direct causality, but there's enough
Right.
of a plausibility of causality that it warrants that disclosure just as much as it does if someone just gives $250
Right.
to a member of Congress.
Like whose
So
views are they really representing? Right.
exactly. And it's really a massive loophole in which governments, instead of lobbying, which does get disclosed to a large
Right.
extent, they
Hmm.
have to fill out FARA forms, etc. It's
Hmm.
just easier to just funnel the money through think tanks. There's no responsibility to disclose. And most think tanks don't, but we've done everything we can to bring as much transparency to it as possible. And some think tanks are doing amazingly well. I think actually the best Stimson Center gets even a higher ranking than my own institute does, according to
Hmm.
our ranking system, because how
Yeah.
far they go in the transparency.
Great.
But going back to your question, I'm pretty confident we're the only. In fact, I don't think there's any think tank focusing on foreign policy that is above $3 million that has the same rule as we do, which is they don't take money from governments or from arms industry.
Very interesting. Well, I mean, that being said, it's even more an honor for American Muslim Community Foundation and our donor advised fund families to be supporting your work. And I hadn't
And
heard of
we're
the
very
Quincy.
grateful for it.
Absolutely. I hadn't heard of the Quincy Institute before. My first job in development as a fundraiser was with the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. So
Mhm.
they're a think tank that was founded in Michigan, but based in DC, and they focus on the American Muslim community.
Mm.
So ISPU was my entry into the think tank world. And then, of course, learning
Interesting.
about Brookings and other established institutions. But you're absolutely right that, far often or not, the interest of the think tank or the research that they do or the angle that they provide is often chasing the money, right? So if you can have that barrier of not accepting money from the weapons industry or from foreign entities, you stay true to what your mission and vision is, and you get to control the research that you do based on your own interests as opposed to others. So I highly commend
And,
you
and, and if
for
I could just
keeping that.
add one small
Please.
detail that might be of interest to people who are not in DC and don't get to see these things up front. If you visited the average think tank 25 years ago, you would have visited what genuinely was a nonprofit organization Their
Hmm.
offices would look as if they were a nonprofit. Their
Yeah.
budget was like a
Yeah.
nonprofit.
Hmm.
Go visit some of them today. They look, you will think that you have visited Goldman Sachs headquarters in New York.
Sure.
It's that flashy.
Yeah.
And it is because of a massive increase of foreign funding and defense contractor funding, much of it part of the global war on terror,
Yeah.
and the way that the American foreign policy was being militarized.
Yeah. Very, very interesting to kind of see the influence there, even from an organizational culture perspective.
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, I mean, you know, with the time we have remaining, is there anything that you didn't get around to sharing or any advice that you have? You know, you're a founder of several organizations, you are in this space, somebody who maybe wants to get into foreign policy or to think tanks, just any advice that you have to share with people.
Um, I hope that we see far greater participation by civil society organizations and individuals, from all kinds of communities in this space going forward. It is very important. There is oftentimes, I mean, we've talked about money, etc., and that's very important. But sometimes these things also tend to end up becoming barriers and repellents that ensures that people that perhaps have a different perspective, than what is the acceptable, very limited range of perspective in Washington, D.C., they don't even try. They don't even come
Yeah.
to the city. And I understand why. You come here and you're like, okay, either I have to sell out or I'm going to just have to leave after a couple of years and go into academia or something. Then it's just not worth it. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It ends up being a system that ensures that people who are not completely in agreement with the system don't even bother trying. And when they do, they did what I did before in NIAC, which at the end of the day was kind of like nibbling on the ankles or in the margins of the policy
Right.
rather than going to its very core. This is part of the reason why we created Quincy. We wanted a real proper think tank with the depth so that people could make a career pursuing a different approach to foreign policy, that they
Hmm.
could go into the administration and come back, and many of them actually have
Right.
done so,
Hmm.
operating like all of these other think tanks, but with one significant exception, of course, a difference, which is we're here to challenge
Yeah.
and ultimately replace this paradigm with one that is much, much more in line with the majority view of Americans, regardless of what community you're from. Overwhelmingly, we see it left and right,
Yeah.
even demographically, increasingly. The biggest holdout are the boomers who are still kind of remembering the good wars of World War II. There's not been a lot of good wars since then. Um,
Yeah.
but bottom line, the American people want a different foreign policy. And the existing think tank ecosystem was not in line with that. And they had done everything else they could to make sure that there was no penetration of their space. We have now penetrated, and we hope that more institutions are built that are penetrating it.
Well, I really want to tip my hat to you for, not only establishing NIAC, but then giving birth to Quincy in the sense that you went from something very particular, and obviously, everything that's happening in Iran, my heart is with you and everybody that is there, um, to something more global. And I think you've had a much more expansive impact with the work at Quincy, but it's probably also propelled your work with Iran foreign policy even that much more, because you can influence other trusted leaders that have experienced what work Quincy has done, and then you bring that angle with your history of Iran into the equation as well. So, had you just focused on Iran, it would have been a different trajectory
Yeah,
for you. And with your
definitely.
trajectory through Quincy, I think that you've been able to do so much more, not only for the people of Iran, but for everybody else around the world. So it's truly an honor to have this opportunity to
Thank you.
chat
Honor
with
is
you.
mine.
Yeah,
Really appreciate it. I'm very, very thankful for your support.
absolutely. So again, anybody who's listening through AMCF's network, find more information about the Quincy Institute, support them. And it's been a really great time getting to know you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Likewise. All right.
Excellent.